What if history repeated itself, but on an even more devastating scale? Imagine a world where the US, Europe, and their allies are drawn into a global conflict reminiscent of World War II, yet driven by modern tensions. From the Russia-Ukraine war to rising threats in Asia and the Middle East, we'll uncover how fragile alliances and unresolved rivalries could lead to the unthinkable, World War III. Welcome to the alternative history home, where the past meets the impossible. Join us as we explore a chilling alternate timeline, tracing echoes of the past and a future reshaped by global chaos. Join us on a journey through time, exploring alternate histories, thrilling what-if scenarios, and worlds that could have been. While nuclear war often dominates the topics of World War III, this exploration focuses on how conventional warfare, alliances, and geopolitical maneuvers could escalate into an all-consuming conflict. Let's uncover how the unthinkable could have become reality. The Russia-Ukraine War, the initial spark. The war between Russia and Ukraine began in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, but it escalated dramatically in 2022 with a full-scale invasion. What initially seemed like a regional conflict quickly gained international significance, threatening global stability. Countries like the US, UK, and Germany provided Ukraine with advanced weaponry, intelligence, and training. While this strengthened Ukraine's defenses, it also pushed the boundaries between indirect support and direct engagement with Russia. As military aid poured into Ukraine, tensions between NATO and Russia escalated to dangerous levels. In November 2022, the conflict came alarmingly close to expanding. A missile struck a village in Poland, killing 2 civilians. Initial reports suggested it was a Russian attack, prompting fears that NATO would invoke Article 5, requiring a collective military response. The world held its breath until investigations revealed the missile was a misfire from Ukrainian defense systems. But what if this was actually the beginning of a Russian invasion? Could this have been the flashpoint for a global war? Meanwhile, as the world's attention fixated on Ukraine, China began escalating its aggression toward Taiwan. Large-scale military exercises and repeated airspace violations signaled a potential invasion. Would the United States, already stretched thin in Europe, be able to respond? Could these simultaneous crises have overwhelmed Western powers, triggering a domino effect into global chaos? The potential for World War III extended beyond Ukraine. Throughout the same period, tensions flared in other regions, each with its own risks of escalation. From Eastern Europe to the Middle East, these flashpoints threatened to draw the world's superpowers into direct confrontation. Poland became a critical player in the escalating conflict. Its position as a NATO hub for transporting weapons and aid into Ukraine made it both a strategic ally and a potential target for Russian retaliation. The Suwalki Gap, a narrow corridor between Poland and Lithuania, was another point of vulnerability. If Russia seized this region, NATO's Baltic members could be isolated, creating a major crisis. Would NATO's unity hold firm under such strain, or would internal divisions weaken the alliance? These questions loomed large as the situation grew more precarious. In Asia, the Taiwan Strait emerged as a key flashpoint. China's military activities near Taiwan raised fears of an imminent invasion, while the US prepared for a potential conflict. Regional allies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia would likely join the fray, turning the Pacific into a major theater of war. At the same time, North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, saw an opportunity. With global powers distracted, North Korea could launch an offensive against South Korea, aiming to reunify the peninsula. The US, already engaged in multiple conflicts, would be forced to divide its resources further. Would these two crises in Asia erupt simultaneously, pulling even more nations into the conflict? The Middle East had long been a region of overlapping rivalries and unresolved tensions. The Syrian civil war, Iran-Saudi Arabia proxy conflicts, and ongoing clashes between Israel and its neighbors created an unpredictable environment. What if one of these flashpoints had spiraled out of control, forcing global powers to intervene? Could the Middle East have been the true starting point for World War III? World War III would not be fought by isolated nations, but by alliances shaped through shared interests and historical ties. These alliances would determine the shape and scale of the conflict. The Western Alliance would include NATO nations like the US, UK, France, and Germany, as well as Pacific allies such as Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Ukraine and Taiwan, although not NATO members, would align closely with this bloc in the face of aggression. On the other side, Russia and China would lead a coalition that included Belarus, North Korea, and Iran. Proxy groups like Hezbollah in the Middle East could further destabilize key regions, challenging the Western alliance. India, with its complex ties to both Russia and the West, might remain neutral, but could wield significant influence. Saudi Arabia, controlling vast oil reserves, could tip the scales without directly entering the conflict. Would these alliances hold under the weight of war, or would they fracture as nations prioritized their own survival? In this alternate timeline, World War III would consume the globe, turning regions into battlegrounds due to their strategic, economic, or geopolitical importance. Each theater of war presents unique challenges, reflecting the complexity of modern conflict. Europe would be one of the first and most critical theaters of war. The Eastern Front, encompassing Poland, the Baltic states, and the Suwalki Gap, would become the primary focus of conflict between NATO and Russia. Poland's strategic location as a NATO logistics hub makes it essential for transporting weapons, troops, and supplies into Eastern Europe. If Russia were to seize the Suwalki Gap, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania could be isolated, leaving them vulnerable to Russian advances. Kaliningrad, a heavily militarized Russian exclave, would serve as a launch point for Russian operations, aiming to disrupt NATO's cohesion and cut off reinforcements. Russia's strategy would likely involve overwhelming NATO forces with speed and strength, forcing Europe into a defensive position. Meanwhile, NATO would have to coordinate a massive response to protect its eastern flank, testing the unity of the alliance under immense pressure. In the Asia-Pacific, two flashpoints would dominate the conflict: the Taiwan Strait and the Korean Peninsula. The Taiwan Strait would become the center of naval and aerial battles as China attempts to blockade or invade Taiwan. Taiwan holds significant geopolitical importance as a hub of advanced semiconductor production, which powers everything from smartphones to military technology. Controlling Taiwan would give China a technological edge and shift the balance of power in the region. For the United States and its allies, defending Taiwan is not just a matter of principle, but of strategic necessity. Losing Taiwan could embolden China to challenge U.S. dominance in the Pacific. Japan and South Korea would become critical staging grounds for Allied forces, while Australia might provide logistical and military support. The South China Sea, a vital trade route, would also become contested, with naval skirmishes determining control over the region's resources and commerce. On the Korean Peninsula, North Korea would see an opportunity to act. With global powers distracted, Kim Jong-un might launch an offensive against South Korea, aiming to reunify the peninsula under his regime. South Korea, backed by tens of thousands of U.S. troops, would resist fiercely, turning the peninsula into another devastating theater of war. China might support North Korea indirectly, further dividing U.S. resources and escalating tensions in the region. The Middle East, a region already shaped by conflict, would erupt as proxy wars spiral into open battles. Its strategic importance lies in its vast energy resources and position as a crossroads between Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Persian Gulf would be a critical flashpoint. This region is home to vital oil shipping routes that supply much of the world's energy. Naval skirmishes between Iranian forces and U.S. or allied fleets could disrupt these routes, creating an energy crisis that would cripple economies worldwide. Iran might also use its proxy forces, like Hezbollah, to destabilize neighboring countries and pressure Israel into retaliatory strikes. Israel, surrounded by hostile actors like Iran and Hezbollah, would fight to maintain its security. Any escalation in this region could draw in larger powers, as the US and Russia already have vested interests in the Middle East. At this point in time, the Arctic has become a region of increasing geopolitical importance, rich in untapped natural resources like oil and gas, and offering new shipping routes. The Arctic would attract the attention of global powers. Russia, already militarizing its Arctic territories, would seek to dominate the region, using its fleet of icebreakers and military installations to secure control. NATO nations, including Canada, Norway, and the United States, would respond to protect their claims in this region. The harsh, icy environment would present unique challenges, from freezing temperatures to logistical difficulties, making the Arctic a slow but strategic theater of war. Africa's role in World War III would center on its rich natural resources and key geographical choke points. The Horn of Africa, near the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, would become critical due to its proximity to vital shipping lanes. Controlling this region would allow one side to dominate global trade routes. Nations like Egypt, with its control of the Suez Canal, would be pivotal. The canal serves as a vital shortcut between Europe and Asia for military and commercial ships. Disruptions here would cause chaos for global supply chains. Meanwhile, Algeria and Libya, with their oil and gas reserves, could see battles over control of energy supplies to Europe. Proxy conflicts might erupt in other parts of Africa, with global powers backing local factions to secure access to resources like rare earth minerals, essential for advanced technologies. World War III would extend far beyond traditional battlefields, making cyberspace and outer space crucial theaters of war. Attacks on power grids, communication networks, and financial systems would paralyze nations without firing a single shot. A successful cyber attack could shut down a country's infrastructure, leaving its military and economy in disarray with no clear path. Major players like China, Russia, and the US would rely heavily on their cyber capabilities to weaken their adversaries. Satellites would become key targets, as they control navigation, communication, and surveillance systems. Anti-satellite weapons could blind an enemy's forces, disrupt their command chains, and even sabotage missile defense systems. The race to control space would redefine modern warfare, making it a critical domain in the conflict. Naval warfare would dominate the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, as control over international waters becomes vital for transporting troops, supplies, and resources. Submarines armed with ballistic missiles would prowl the depths, targeting fleets and supply convoys. Aircraft carriers would serve as mobile command centers, projecting power across vast distances. Strategic choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, and the Malacca Strait would become high-stakes battlegrounds, as control over these routes could determine the flow of resources and reinforcements. The devastation of World War III would leave the world forever changed. Trade routes would be severed, resources would become scarce, and financial systems would collapse. Inflation and shortages would create widespread unrest, sparking protests and riots in even the most stable nations. Refugee flows would overwhelm neighboring countries, straining their resources and infrastructure to the breaking point. Entire regions would be left uninhabitable due to environmental destruction and the aftermath of battles, forcing millions to seek shelter elsewhere. Major powers like the US, Russia, and China could emerge weakened, their economies and militaries strained beyond repair. Regional powers such as India or Brazil might rise to prominence, taking on leadership roles in a reshaped world order. Would humanity rebuild and thrive again, or fall deeper into chaos? World War III wouldn't just change nations. It would alter the course of humanity forever. Could we rise from the ashes and rebuild, or would we fall into the same cycles of destruction? If you enjoyed this journey through alternate history, hit subscribe and join us for more explorations. Let us know in the comments which what-if scenario you'd like to see next. Until next time.